Our next speaker will be Rabbi Wolf. Rabbi Michael Wolf has been the hospital chaplain at the Donald Berman Maimonides Center since January '98 and the chaplain at Jewish Eldercare since 2007. Rabbi Wolf was the chaplaincy coordinator for the Montreal Jewish Community, a federation of CJA, and then the community chaplaincy program of the Cummings Jewish Center for Seniors. Rabbi Wolf received his ordination from Yeshiva University, has a degree in Jewish education, and a master's degree in social work. So we now present Rabbi Wolf to present us with another viewpoint.
And that which is in terms of that we don't look at the quality of the person's life, because each individual, whether they are alert or they're not alert, or whether they're in pain or they're not in pain, or whether they are handicapped or they're physically capable, everybody has a soul. So the quality of the person's life is not the issue. The issue would really be in terms of prolonging life. But when we talk about prolonging life, then we come into different aspects and different factors that come into play. And you can't say that you have to emphasize prolonging life at all costs. So I wanted to show you the different issues. The first issue is prolonging life versus preventing death. That at a certain point we understand that the person is dying and the condition is not reversible. And at that point, one has to look at whether one is prolonging the person's life or whether one is just stopping the dying process from taking place. The second issue will be alleviating suffering, because there is a mitzvah to treat for pain, that one is not supposed to suffer. That the concept in Judaism is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which means to love your neighbor as yourself. So you don't want to impose pain on somebody or suffering. And the doctor, if he's no longer able to prolong the person's life, has the mitzvah, the commandment to stop the suffering or to alleviate the pain. And then the third issue is which treatments cannot be withheld. Because under Jewish law, certain aspects of what a doctor would say is a medical treatment is not really a medical treatment, it's part of a life process. So like breathing is a life process, and eating and drinking are life processes. And under Jewish law, they would not be defined as a medical treatment. And then the final factor is whose decision is it? That can the individual make their own decision, or is it left up to God, or is it left up to the family? So I'd like to present the first issue, which is prolonging life versus preventing death. And the question is, when are you prolonging life? So if the person is in a state of expiring, so then the one can, and the body is shutting down, one can say that one is not doesn't have to do anything to prolong the person's life, because you're not. The person is dying, right? The body is shutting down. And then the second question is, how long should life be performed? So under Jewish law, there's a discussion between what's called Chaye Shah and Chaye Olam. Chaye Shah means life for the moment, and Chaye Olam means a continual life. Olam here doesn't mean eternal. It really means continual. So the definition of Chaye Olam is where there is an expectation to live more than 1 year. So if somebody is diagnosed with a terminal cancer and the doctor says to you, you have 6 months, so then you don't have to have any operation that would prolong your life, because your life is not expected to go past 6 months. Chaye Olam would mean you're going to live longer than 1 year. So you don't necessarily have to consent to any treatments which prolong your life past the 6-month period, right? You only consent when there is a hope that you're going to live longer than one year. Okay, and this is interesting in cases of when somebody has a heart condition and they want to know whether they should be resuscitated. So if you're if you have a chronic heart failure and your life expectancy is less than 1 year, you do not have to consent to be resuscitated. Okay, then we come to the mitzvah of alleviating suffering. Alleviating suffering, there's a commandment to treat for pain. And one can decline surgery or chemotherapy, which is invasive, if it increases the pain and the suffering, and your life is not going to be prolonged beyond the year period. But the factors that one cannot refuse are you cannot decline oxygen, food, or drink because they're considered natural life processes, as opposed to a medical treatment. So if somebody is suffering and they're diagnosed with a terminal illness, they should continue to receive nutrition and hydration, because those are part of one's natural processes, which would come into play here in the case that was presented by Susan Click. And the last point that the rabbis make is that antibiotics are considered ways of alleviating suffering. So if you treat with antibiotics, it's to help the person breathe better, or to help the person feel better, and to decrease a fever, or to decrease pain. And that's why one should not decline antibiotics either. So then the next factor is who decides. So Judaism rejects the notion of unlimited personal autonomy. The idea is that God gives us life and God takes it away. That our body is a house for the soul, and the soul has to be returned to God. So you cannot say that a person can decide when they want to end their own life. But there are 4 extenuating factors, which I mentioned before, where a person is able to decide whether or not they want to continue with their life. So the 4 factors for declining treatment are, according to Reb Moshe Feinstein, that the person does not expect to live more than 1 year, so he has the right to decline treatment. He has unbearable pain and suffering, and he wants to be put out of his misery, so to speak. And the patient does not wish to be treated if he decides on his own. That the idea is that a person, when they're capable of making a rational decision, they make the decision, not the doctor and not the family. That the patient themselves or the resident themselves can make a rational decision and decide whether or not they want to be treated. Okay, but if they know that they're going to live for more than 1 year, then the rabbi would say you overrule their choice. And if the patient cannot decide, then the person who is most involved is the one who makes the decision, but one should really follow what the person would have wished. You don't go on the basis of your own feelings. Rather, you go on the basis of what you think the patient or the resident would have wanted. So now we get to our situation. There are extenuating circumstances for not placing a feeding tube. So the first one is that when the operation to place a feeding tube is life-threatening. So that a person, if they have to, because to have a peg put in is an operation, it's a surgical procedure, the person has to be evaluated, and one has to decide whether or not the person can manage, would not die as a result of the operation, or their condition wouldn't worsen. So when an operation to place a feeding tube is life-threatening, one does not have to go through with the operation. When the person's body, number 2 is when the person's body can no longer absorb or process the food. So if the person has a weakened heart and the or the kidneys are breaking down, so you don't insist on continuing to feed, because you're killing the person by feeding them. And the third is when the feeding tube causes infection and risk to the health of the person, which might be in the case of the crisis, which was being administered at the time in the situation that we were looking at. And finally, when the person is in a state of expiry. In the Hebrew terms, it's called gozes, which means the person is dying within 72 hours. But it doesn't necessarily really have to be 72 hours. It can be that the body is shutting down. That I saw a case recently where the person's heart was slowing down. You can't tell how long they're going to take to pass away, but you don't have to continue to give them an IV and to give them fluids, because the body is not processing it. And when the body isn't processing it, then you say that the person is in a state of expiry, and that the nutrition and the hydration are no longer life-sustaining.